Hello and welcome to Dayton Live again. I'm your host, Anthony Whitmore, and I can't say enough about our guest today. Our guest, we're privileged to have as our guest the honorable, remarkably talented young man who is our Assistant Chief of Police for Dayton, Ohio. Welcome, Eric Henderson.
Thank you, Dr. Whitmore, for having me on the show today.
Eric, I was excited about you coming. It's interesting. I had two crises that could have involved police just this morning. Life has been interesting, as I always say, gotten older, but I'll just say for my sake, gotten more mature. But today, having those two issues prior to you coming has me a bit unrattled, but also seeing you helps me to understand that so many things can happen in a community and in all of our lives because it just pops up. And you have to make a decision how to respond to that or not to respond. And in my case, when it's someone that you love, it then involves other kinds of decision making. Eric, I shared with you that this show for me is about highlighting our community and in particular those individuals like yourself who make a difference. I've watched you over the years grow up and mature, and to see you go through the ranks to become our assistant chief, that means a lot to me as a person from this community and as a person of color, to see a young man who not only has had access to upward mobility, but to be able to prepare yourself and to do something with it. So today, you are assistant chief. But I want to talk a little bit about who Eric Henderson is before we get to that policing part. Who is Eric Henderson? Are you from Dayton?
Yes, I'm born and raised in Dayton. I grew up mainly in the northwest area of the city, in the Fairview neighborhood. Attended Dayton Public Schools, my whole life. Went to Van Cleve school there on Main Street.
Yes.
Kindergarten, Jefferson, Fairview Elementary, Fairview Middle, and then I graduated from Meadowdale High School in 1996.
And it was interesting because I'm much older than you, and just thinking about schools, Dayton has changed a long distance from what it used to be. There was times, Eric, that because of our community being so segregated, there were only certain schools that people like you and I could attend. In my generation, it would have been, Waugaman, Miami Chapel, Whittier, and Irving, if I'm not mistaken, and of course McFarland or Dunbar. And some were privileged to attend Roosevelt, and even fewer were able eventually to land at Patterson, which I understand now is our opponent's career. Where are your parents from, Eric?
Both of my parents are from down south. So my dad's from Talladega, Alabama, moved here when I think he was 15, and my mom's from about 60 miles outside of Jackson, Mississippi. She moved here around, I think, 18 years old. So southern roots, and spent a lot of time down there in the summer.
Well, I like those southern roots, and it tells us a lot about why your manners are the way that they are, and that you grew up to have that, not only that discipline, but that politeness and respect for others as well as self. Eric, when you were in school, is policing what you wanted to do, or is this just something that came later? How did you get to this part of your life?
That's a great question, because I think I came into policing, I say by accident, but I think it's where I was meant to be. When through school, I had no interest in becoming a police officer. I actually started off cutting grass with my own lawn mowing business as a young teenager. And I started working at, remember Elder Beerman's department store. They're at Philadelphia and Siementhaler.
Of course I do. I'm surprised you do, because you're a young man.
I grew up in that store.
Oh, okay.
So I remember going there all the time as a kid, because we didn't live far from there with my parents, my dad especially. One of the things, when I turned 16, I got a job there. So worked there, and during that time, I actually was approached by loss prevention and said they thought I would be a good candidate to basically provide security for the store. So once I got into that, I began meeting a lot of Dayton officers that would come in there and interact with them, and then we actually had some that worked there off duty, and they really took me under their wing. So to me, it was a great opportunity to learn about the people, behind the badge. So I got to know them, know about their families and things like that, and saw they were just people.
Absolutely. But that's interesting. It brought back very pleasant memories. I think many of us, those also listening to us today, remember that area right there off of Philadelphia and Siebenthaler, and especially Elder Bierman and Reichs, etc. Well, I'm pleased that you started very young in the sense of from prevention loss, identifying your characteristics and your character, and knowing that there was something about you that would just fit with law enforcement. We're more challenged now than ever because at that time, I don't think the community was as perhaps informed. I don't like the word saying we weren't educated. So I'll just say we weren't as informed about policing. And it certainly was still a time in which communities were not very trusting of policemen. And I'm sure part of that is because we did not see people who looked like us, and we did not see people who lived in our community. And so what I call the new face of police is individuals like yourself. It's not just changing how we approach and how we deal with people, but making sure that folks look like the community that they are policing, and they have the right abilities as well as the skills to speak to those folks and to address their needs, or at least place them or send them to someone who can address their needs.
Correct. And what's interesting, I still remember Chief Lowe coming in there, buying his suits there at Elder Bierman. So knowing, hey, that's the chief of police sitting there, coming into the store, interacting with. And you're right, Dr. Whitmore. I mean, I think it's good for kids to see people that look like them and, have family and everything within the community, because I think that is a great benefit. But I also think it's important that we have just people that are willing to take the time to learn. It's the diversity of thought. So taking the time to understand the different cultures and nuances of communities. So I think that's important also. So, at times, even when we have people that look like, they still might not take the time to understand what's going on in the community. So I think it's important that everyone always, goes in with an open mind and willing to learn and willing to really do the work that matters within our communities.
To do the work as well as, I hope, Eric, to see every individual as a human being and has the right to respect and the right to be heard. And I know there are a lot of challenges today, and there were challenges when I was your age and much younger. But unfortunately, we didn't have the wherewithal as a greater community from the education and or the medical part to understand that there are folks in our community that have issues that not only can they not resolve, there's no one in their family and unfortunately even in their community to help address those needs. Now, I started with the question of asking about the new policing. What does that look like today in Dayton?
I think in Dayton, we're trying to be more community focused and also focus on what problems the community is having. So we're sending officers to community neighborhood meetings. We have a neighborhood president's forum where we hear directly from the community what problems in their neighborhood they're having, and then try to collaboratively work on solutions to those issues. Because what I may think is a problem in the area may not be the problem when we actually speak to the neighborhood or the citizens within that neighborhood. So that's one thing we're focused on. For instance, now we're dealing with an increase in grand theft autos, dealing with specific models of Kia and Hyundais being targeted. So it's sharing that information every time our officers at community meetings about how to best secure their property, how to help prevent them from becoming a victim. So those are things that we're doing now, and not just going out and arresting people. We're trying to educate everyone, because I rather prevent a crime from occurring than have a crime occur and have to make an arrest. So that's really what our mindset is prevention first.
And I like that. I like the fact of you'd rather prevent a crime. And I'm sure that myself as well as our listeners would agree that crime will not disappear during our lifetime. For many reasons, there will be there. What are some of those factors from your perspective? We hear a lot from sociologists, psychologists, educationists, academic people, but what are your thoughts as to why we have these types of incidents that end up in being crime?
Yeah, and I think there's two different answers there, because you have the violent crime issue and then you have property crime issue. Most of our property crimes are crime of opportunity. So it may be a vehicle's left unlocked and someone that needs something checks the door handle, gets access to that vehicle. So the way to prevent that is to keep your door locked. But then let's take it to the more serious crimes that we have a challenge with in some areas of our community is violent crime. And a lot of that is fueled off of simple just misunderstandings or basically arguments over sometimes trivial matters. So to me, that really goes to a larger community issue that the police department cannot solve alone. I mean, some of this starts with what's taught in school, conflict resolution, de-escalation. You hear a lot of that with law enforcement, but some of those skills have to be taught also at a young age in our school systems. Not saying that they're not, but there needs to be a strict focus on some of those things, because a lot of what we see with gun crime is systemic. It's generally speaking, if someone's a victim of a gun crime, the chances that they may become a victim again increases, or that they may become a perpetrator, depending on what was the cause of that initial incident. So those are things that we're trying to focus on, and I can tell you it's difficult. How do we educate the community on how to become basically violent interrupters? So, I mean, I can't tell you how many times you hear things that, yeah, I knew, my son was in an argument with this individual. I knew they had access to weapons. Someone's house may be shot up, and then later on there's a homicide linked to that. And sometimes those other crimes aren't reported to us. So there's times where we may be able to intervene earlier on in the process, and maybe it would require an arrest, but at least maybe we prevent the more serious crime from occurring, which is loss of life. So, but at the same time, you also have the whole issue of no one wants to be a snitch. So how do we solve that? And then it goes back to community relations with law enforcement, trust in law enforcement. So it's that endless cycle of how do we solve this? I wish I had the answer, but I can tell you we're going to keep working on it, because, I mean, to me, any loss of life is too much in our community. And
Absolutely.
A lot of times it's individuals that look like me, young, black males that have far too much to live for. And sometimes the person that took their lives don't see the value in life. And the individual, we have to make sure people see the value of life is what we have to do in our community.
And I thank you for acknowledging that, in particular, young black males have value and they have purpose. And unfortunately, often, as I shared with you prior to speaking this morning, I had two issues, one of which had to deal with brothers fighting. It seemed like those individuals, when we fight our own families, we go at it even harder for whatever reason. So when you were talking, I thought about what you said about those Southern parents. I too am from the South. I was raised here in Dayton, but I was born in the South. So my parents were very Southern, non-educated parents, but great parents. And they taught not only me and my older siblings and my nephews who were raised with me, they also taught my friends, as did my friends' parents teach me and mother me and father me as well, about what was right and what was wrong and how to respect yourself and how to respect other people. I also thought when you were speaking was about violence, and often we think of violence only happening in the urban area or the ghetto. Violence, crime happens all over the greater Dayton community. I would think it may not happen as much in certain parts of suburbs, but having lived in the suburbs, I know that it exists.
Yes, it does happen. Unfortunately, it does impact, just because of the density, urban communities more than others. So that's something we're always focused on, trying to solve. And again, it's when you hear the conversation about disproportionate,
Yes.
policing, but when you look at the percentages of some of our victims of violent crimes, generally speaking, within Dayton, 80 to 90% of them are black. And unfortunately, most of the time, the individual that was involved in that incident, the suspect, is also black. So it impacts our community from both sides. So let's say, for instance, we have a homicide of a black male, and it's a black male that killed that individual. That's 2 lost lives. Because when the individual is convicted of that crime, they're not able to provide for their family, not able to be productive citizens in our community. So that's what we're faced with. And I think we have to have honest conversations about how do we solve this issue and make sure, because to me, it all boils down about valuing life. We may have a dispute here, but I know we're going to be laughing and joking once we walk out of here, because I value your opinion, I value you as a person. So it's that respect. How do we get everyone to have that is what we have to work on.
Well, one thing is very clear. We've got to have more Eric Hendersons out here and have those individuals exposed to the community. And that's all aspects of the community, because crime is beyond color.
Correct.
While I do recognize the high numbers associated with people of color, and that's across the country, yes, I also recognize that the work is our job, and that our part means more than just the Dayton police.
Correct.
We've got to go back to having communities. We also had, when I was younger, we had those associations like priority boards and other groups who knew the community that they lived in. And they could identify not only what was going on, but the individuals that may have needs.
Correct.
And many of those needs, Eric, when I was a kid, we had McCall's and other places to work where men and women, especially our fathers, because usually the mothers were raising the kids, but they would walk to work because transportation has always been an issue among poor people of any color. And now there aren't that many places to work in the, say, in the greater or in the inner city part, where now you have to be able to get out to, basically out to the suburbs to get a job. And we don't have access often to cars because of of poverty or not having the things that perhaps other people have in other parts of our community.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, a lot of crime, when you look at it, is based on economic factors. So if we're able to provide, opportunities for employment and affordable housing in the city, those things will contribute to the healthiness of the community. Because when you look at maps, overlap our crime, especially our violent crime where we're struggling there. You also have health issues.
Yes.
You have, let's go back to the redlining issues. So, all of this overlaps. Infant mortality issues. Now infant mortality impacts everyone throughout, our county and our city. So it's just not within the Black community. But when you look at the numbers, the percentages are higher in the Black community. So it's all of these are contributing factors that play a role. And like again, I mean, it's I think about it. How can we solve this? And I can do my part, but I think one of my biggest roles in my current position is to provide that my lens to some of this and look for ways to get other partners to the table. So because there's a lot of people in this community doing great work, sometimes we're just siloed, and it's amazing what can happen is if we are able to come together, and sometimes it just takes that right person to bring everyone to the table and start working collaboratively towards a common goal. But I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there. So I don't want to come across as doom and gloom by any means, but there's a lot more to do.
And I think there will always be a lot more to do, Eric. The key is not so much of that there's more to do. For me, the key is having willing citizens and individuals to do it and
Correct.
willing to do that work, because the work has to be done. And we've got to start preschool on up.
Yes.
Making sure that our kids understand it's okay to be kind. And no, you can't have your way all the time.
Right.
And the word no is not a bad word.
Yes.
And you must learn how to get along with other people.
Right.
And to disagree with other people. Just some things that your parents and our generation, we were taught those things.
Correct.
I'm hoping that those things are still taught, even though in my family, I have a lot of generations behind me. The further away it goes out, the less I see those things that were a part of your parents and my growing up. Right. And that's unfortunate. I don't want time to get away with us from ignoring a couple of other aspects, because I hope to have your boss on my show as well to talk about some other aspects in addition. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about Eric because of not only the interest in having a need to change our community, but we need good people to do that. And we've got to have not only good people, but qualified people. Is there an issue now with us hiring appropriate people and good people?
Yes, I mean, it's locally, bringing folks into the law enforcement profession has been challenging, but it's just not locally, it's nationally. So I think a lot of that goes back to, the narrative around law enforcement. But I can tell you, even within the city of Dayton, one-on-one with a lot of our community members, they want and need the police department. They want officers in their communities, but they want them addressing the issues that they're having or experiencing in their neighborhood. So one of the efforts we have right now is we have an open application period for Police Recruit that runs until June 1st of 2023. So if anyone's interested in joining the Dayton Police Department, the time is now. You can go to joindaytonpd.com, which will provide additional information. But we're looking for folks with good moral character, that are 20 years old or older, no serious infractions, but at the same time, even if you think you may have something in your background that may please apply, because it may not it may be something we can work through. And we want people from the city of Dayton. We want people that know about our community, know its nuances, knows the neighborhoods, knows the areas they may have been doing some things they shouldn't have been doing as a kid. So we need folks from our community because we have to have enough people to be able to respond and take care of our citizens and community.
And I definitely think that's crucial, but I was also thinking in terms of, I'm not sure if you know my history with working with reentry. That's another part of my purpose and mission in life, is make sure that men and women who have made mistakes have access to another chance at life. And I was thinking, and perhaps that's something I'll approach not only just with you, but also with the chief. While individuals who have made mistakes, they may not be able to become police officers, but there's still a role for them to play in helping you to foster better communication in the community in which we all live and move about in. And so there may be other types of opportunities for those other individuals who already have the relationship with that community. You spoke of snitching and that kind of thing. I find that often when I'm speaking to young people, that's a common discussion. But they'd rather have that understanding with someone who has had a history than someone like me who's always been an individual who probably was more of a coward and stayed away from things that would hurt my family name, hurt myself, and that probably, I would say, more hurt my parents. I didn't want to ever do that. That was always a challenge for us. But I think that you're on the right road to bringing about change, and you're on the right road for opening up doors so that people can not only reach out to you, but you are making the effort to reach out to them. And if you're thinking about working with other parts of the community to help our community to evolve, where we do have jobs, we have good housing, we have access to what everybody else wants in our community, or in the ghetto, as one would say. We too have that access. Eric, it means a lot to me to see you. We could talk for hours, and I hope that we will revisit again before the year is out about where we are. I'm also hoping that people heard you loud and clear about if they have someone who fits being a policeman or woman, please to reach out to you and to reach out to join DaytonPD.com. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I guess I do listen. That, as well as to identify anyone that can be of a help to our community. But I also hope that you, as our audience, would understand the importance of having a community the way you want that community to be. No, we are not perfect, and it would be a long time before any community can be perfect. But since I grew up in this community of the ghetto, if I can make it, so can any other kid make it. Now, we need to ask ourselves as a community, why is it different today than what it was when people my generation were growing up? I love this community. I'm grateful that I had those non-educated parents and those wonderful people on my street and community, Eric, that loved all of us kids. And I thank God for that. The question for you, my audience, is what are you willing to do to help our community to be what it should be, ought to be, and what is necessary to survive? Look forward to seeing you next time. I'll see you on Dayton Live. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whitmore.